Hello, and welcome to the Vedic Conversation, where each episode we take a different topic and look at it through the lens of storytelling and from the perspective of the Veda, an ancient but still very much relevant body of knowledge from India. I'm Derrick Yanford, a Vedic meditation teacher based in New York City, and I'm joined by my Vedic colleagues Thompson in London and Rory Kinsella in Sydney. In this episode, we share stories with a friend of mine that I have much respect for, George Peterson, a very busy man who wears many hats. And with just 11 days out from his wedding, George was able to carve out some time and talk with us about his unique story of finding meditation after years of drug addiction. Soon, George will be one of our colleagues, as he is currently a Vedic meditation teacher in training. With a thirst for knowledge and a passion to bring meditation to the world, George shares with us his journey. Have a listen, but don't forget to stick around until the end, where we'll share how you can become involved in the conversation. And remember, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Outside of being a meditation teacher trained in Deepak Chopra's primordial sound meditation method, George is the creator and host of the Global Shift podcast that interviews a variety of guests, from yogis to hip-hop artists. He is the creator and editor of the email publication entitled The Good Newsletter, sharing the positive and inspiring good news stories we don't often hear about in the media. He is also the founder of the nonprofit, the Jordan Hannah Recovery Group, whose mission is to provide the knowledge and experience of the teachings of meditation, yoga, healthy living, and diet to individuals and families impacted by addiction. Additionally, he hosts wellness and meditation retreats across the country through Nourish Mindful events and is currently in the midst of writing his first book. Welcome, George Peterson, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and that was a lovely introduction. I should have you introduce me on every show I go on.
Well, you know what's interesting? I haven't known you for very long, and we met originally. I think we were assisting Light for one of his courses. And then as I got to know you in different places or whatnot, I just realized how much you really do, and of all of these things that you're doing. So to me, you know, it's very awe-inspiring, all the endeavors that you're a part of. And so my first question really is, how do you do it? Like, being the wearer of so many different hats, how do you do it all?
I mean, the short answer that just kind of intuitively came to me was, I tell people this in recovery all the time. So I'm also an individual in long-term recovery myself. I was a heroin addict. I've been sober now since August 7th of 2011. And I tell all kinds of people today in recovery, like, if you use that same energy that you used to put into using drugs and alcohol into now creating the life that you want, you'll be unstoppable.
Okay. And tell me, I mean, I know a little bit about your journey into meditation, but for our audience members who don't really know, how did you come across it, really?
So, it's funny because I was just going back and editing some of my book that you were mentioning, and I was talking about my journey and how, I came across meditation for the first time. And, you know, as a kid, when I was young, I remember my mom mentioning meditation, and she actually used to have like this chalkboard in our house growing up, and she would like draw there's a book actually by Deepak Chopra called The Seven Spiritual Laws of Success. I'm not sure if you guys heard of it, but there's a different law for each day of the week. And my mom used to like write the spiritual law of the day up on the board. And I actually got suspended from school once in high school, and my mom made me write a book report on that book. And I didn't want anything to do with it. Because if you've ever read that book, like at the end of each of the laws of success, there's like a little summary that tells you like the 3 ways that you can practically apply each of the principles. And it's funny because I just went to the summary and wrote down what it said in the summary when I gave my mom the book report. and so my mom had like mentioned these things, but I didn't want anything to do with really anything, especially that my mom was telling me I should be doing. But as I mentioned, I picked up drugs and alcohol at an early age. I actually started using heroin for the first time at 15. And, hindsight's 2020, looking back on it, I was always looking for an outside fix for an inside job.
Mm.
And what it was is my problem was never getting sober. It was staying sober. And I couldn't stay sober because after 30, 60, or 90 days without drugs or alcohol, I felt this deep feeling of discontentment on the inside. And I knew no way other than to get high again to provide myself with temporary relief from that discomfort that I felt. And so my life became one more attempt at using heroin, followed by one more failure at using over and over and over again until eventually on August 6th of 2011, I'd been sober about 89 days because I'd been trying to get sober for about, um, we'll say 5 years, but I just wasn't willing to do what it took. And when on August 6th of 2011, I took one sip of a drink and I felt instantly hopeless on the inside, like I had been shooting heroin for months. And I got to what I called a jumping off place, which meant I was going to keep going on the way I was going and die, or I was going to ask for help. And luckily, I chose the latter. I chose to ask for help. And actually, previously, during those 5 years when I was attempting to get sober, but still trying to do things George's way at the time, I had been super uncomfortable in my own skin. And I was at this sober camp out, and I happened to have an MP3 player that my mom had given me to listen to some music on, but she also had some guided meditations on there. And I got curious, and I'm like, I'm just going to try one of these. It was actually, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the meditation teacher, David G. He used to be associated with Deepak Chopra's Center for Wellbeing, and now he's just like an independent meditation teacher. But it was a guided meditation by him. I didn't have any really idea who David G was or what the meditation, was going to be like. But I was so uncomfortable in my own skin at this sober campout because one of my, biggest fears that I had was fear of what other people thought about me. And I had a really hard time communicating with the opposite sex. And so I was at this sober campout. There were all these people there, and I just felt so uncomfortable. I was around, let's say a couple hundred people, but inside I felt totally alone. And I just, I knew I needed to stay sober, but I didn't know any other way to get any relief from the way that I felt other than to get high again. And I was stuck on this camping trip, and at the time I didn't have a car, so I couldn't leave myself, or I probably would have left and gone and got high. But I decided to try one of these guided meditations that I happen to have with me. And, looking back on it, I didn't really know what I was doing. Now understanding meditation's correct mechanics, but even just listening to this guided meditation, it helped me for the first time feel like I was able to tap into my own inner happiness. And so this time when I got sober, I remembered that feeling. And I actually did a 21-day guided meditation series because it was the only time I'd ever felt good in my own skin without drugs and alcohol. And I was like, wait, I can feel this way and I don't need something outside of myself. That thought came back to me when I got sober this time. And so I decided I found out there was this 21-day guided meditation series by Deepak Chopra and Oprah. And the idea was if you did it for 21 days, it was supposed to create a new habit. And over the course of those 21 days, I started to feel like I was able to access my own inner happiness again. And then I called up Deepak Chopra's Center for Wellbeing, and I literally told them the story that I'm telling you now. Like, I wasn't able to access my own inner happiness without drugs or alcohol ever before, but doing your guided meditation series enabled me to tap into my own inner reservoir of bliss. Like, I didn't have this language at the time, but I explained to them that it was the first time I ever felt happy in my own skin without using. And they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, we want to get you out here to go through our 4-day comprehensive step-by-step meditation training. And they ended up getting me on a payment plan I could afford because at that time I was just getting sober. I was working at Trader Joe's, which is an organic grocery store here in the States, for $10 an hour. In this retreat where you were going to learn this, meditation technique, it was $3,000. So I couldn't afford it, but they were really inspired by my story, and they got me on a payment plan I could afford. And then I went out there, and then I learned primordial sound meditation. And I knew the moment that I learned the meditation, the correct meditation's correct mechanics, and it became like literally one of the easiest, most enjoyable things I got to do all day long. I was like, I need to share this with other people.
Great story. And first of all, congratulations, because not that I know much about drug addiction, but from what I understand, heroin And that addiction is something that is gripping and is not an easy thing to overcome. So kudos to you for that. And the fact that, I don't know, I love that it kind of started in a way that you weren't looking for anything in particular. It was just more curiosity. And it started from something on a player that your mom had in a guided meditation that led its way into getting into the course, which then led its way into you becoming a teacher and all the things that you're doing. And so, what I think is really important that I want to just take a moment and recognize for our audience and our listeners who may be struggling with where should I start, I hope that this story inspires people just to start, not to worry about where it's going to lead you so much, and whatever your situation might be, the best way to start is like you did, just get started. You know, there's a myriad of different ways that we can begin this process, and something over nothing is better. So thank you for sharing that story. Um, so I am curious, what in terms of becoming a teacher? So you learned primordial sound in that same year of 2011. That's when you learned, or was it a little bit after?
No, it was after that because there were some prerequisites, that I had to complete before becoming a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went on this week-long meditation retreat. I just knew, though, because what they had us do during the retreat is write down an intention when we
Mm-hmm.
leave there. And my intention was just to go back there, right, and figure out how I can expand my knowledge of this practice and how I can learn how to share this with other people. And so that intention that I set ended up over the course of the next 3 years
Mm.
manifesting this opportunity to be able to get certified to become a teacher.
Okay, gotcha. And you know what I think is really interesting too? I learned Vedic meditation in 2011, became a teacher a few years ago, and as my awareness continues to expand, I'm looking for different ways of teaching or different methods, and am exploring that. And so, what I think is really interesting about the way that you and I met with hosting for Light is that you had learned another technique, but I think you also trained with Emily Fletcher at one point. You were doing some work with Light, and it just seems like, unlike some other people in the community or in this space, you also seem to be very curious about different kinds of methods and not just, you know, all about this one particular style. Can you speak a little bit more about your interest of different methods?
Yeah, so, after becoming a primordial sound meditation teacher, obviously I wanted to continue to grow and expand my knowledge as a teacher. And I ended up at a festival. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. Um, I, I think it might only be in the States, but I could be wrong. But it's called Wanderlust. It's a yoga festival. And so I went to this yoga festival, Wanderlust, and I met Emily Fletcher, who used to be a Vedic meditation teacher who now teaches Ziva meditation. And I met her and I told her about my mission, which was at the time to try to get meditation into as many people's hands as possible. And she told me that if I was teaching to everybody, I was teaching to nobody. And so she said, like, whose hands do you really want to get meditation into? And I realized it was people in recovery. And so I changed my mission to I want to get meditation into as many people's hands in recovery as possible. And
Hmm.
she was like, I'm really inspired by your story and your mission. Why don't you come take my 4-day comprehensive step-by-step training for free? And so I came to New York City and it wasn't really free. Essentially, I assisted her while I was there. She at one point it was really hot because it was in the summer in New York City. She needed a fan. Like I ran down the street to the store to go get a fan for her. Like I essentially, helped set up and break down the room, but I got to take this training without having to pay the money. And, it was very similar to what I had learned when I learned primordial sound meditation. She gave me a mantra. She taught me the mechanics for using it properly. But I thought that she broke it down in a way that was very beautiful and easy to understand. And so I wanted to continue to expand my knowledge of this practice or this similar style of meditation that had already created such a big transformation in my life. And then and I just kept following inspiration, right? Like I just had Light Watkins, a previous guest of yours, on my podcast yesterday,
Awesome.
and he was, talking about his new book, Knowing Where to Look, and following that voice of inspiration that he talks about. And that's what I kept doing. I just kept following in like what they would call in the Vedic tradition, charm. I just kept following charm, and charm led me to wanting to read this book by Light, which was called Blissmore, his last book before his new book. And I just felt like he did such a beautiful job explaining meditation's correct mechanics. And I was like, could just really resonate. As you guys know from having him on your podcast, he's a really good storyteller. And, charm and my fine level of feeling led me to wanting to learn from, expand my knowledge and learn from Light. And so I ended up back at that festival, Wanderlust, right after he had written that book, and he was, he was at the festival promoting the book. And something I had learned on my journey is that I should offer people who, are inspiring me, see if I can offer them any sort of value. And so I decided that I would just go up to Light and say to him, I'm really inspired by your mission. I've shared your book with countless people. I was still working at Trader Joe's at the time. And I said, I give your book to customers all the time who come in and tell me they want to learn how to meditate. And I would love to help support you on your journey. If there's anything I can ever do to help you, let me know. And he said, well, here's my email. Email me and let me know what you think. And then one day I meditated. And at some point during that day, I came out of meditation. And I had this thought that I should email Light, because I knew he taught his 4-day Vedic meditation training in New York City, and say that if you ever need any help, like setting up and breaking down the room, I'd be more than willing to help you while you're in New York, because I live in Providence, Rhode Island. I could take the train down. And he's like, sure, yeah, I'm coming to New York, and I actually needed an assistant. It was like the following month. So I came to New York, and I got to, help him set up and break down the room, and I got to sit in on his 4-day training. And I just thought, like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen Light teach Vedic meditation, but he uses that 3-tier map. And I just thought, like, that explained meditation's correct mechanics better than anybody else I'd ever seen explain meditation. And so I was like, I actually did my best to literally, as he was talking, memorize everything that he said, because it was like that powerful to me. And then I ended up, again, just continuing to email him, stay in touch, and he gave me another opportunity. And I think the second time I came out there was when I met you, Derrick.
Yeah.
And then, it was just a matter of, following my intuition and wanting to continue to expand my knowledge, so then I could be a better teacher, so I could help impact more people.
It's so beautiful, like this story, and just following charm and listening to your inner voice, but I can, like, what you're doing now, just giving, finding ways to contribute and to serve and to bring value, has led you to this path that you're on. And now it's starting to make a little bit more sense to me why you have all of these platforms. And what's interesting for me is, I lived in New York for a really long time. Now I'm in Florida, and it's a very different vibe. It's not so busy and go. And I kind of feel like I've become unmotivated a little bit. Like, I don't do as much. And I'm slowly recognizing too, it's having these kind of conversations that are reminding me too, right, all I need to do is follow my charm and see where else I can be of service to other people, and let that kind of lead its way. And so I'm really happy to have met you. I mean, I was on your podcast not too long ago. You're now here. I'm interested in joining you on a retreat, because I know that your fiance, like, she's a chef, and I'm just like, I'm really, I want to be more involved in doing and witnessing what it is that you do, like you've been doing for Light, because I think you have something very special to offer this community, especially in the ways that you've come here, and I just feel like you're just a very selfless person. You're just always looking for ways to contribute. So keep up the good work, man. It's going to be amazing to follow your journey.
Thank you. And we got to have Anthony on, because I had Rory on. Now I have you on. And then I want to have all 3 of you on, because I think it'd be cool to do a conversation with all 3 of you on my podcast.
Absolutely.
Well, that's a beautiful offer. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear a bit more about primordial sound, because so you were a teacher of that. Now you're training to teach Vedic meditation, and my knowledge is that Deepak was in the TM organization, very close to Maharishi. He was at one point seen as his natural successor, but then they kind of fell out, and he set up his own thing.
Yeah.
So maybe talk about how these techniques differ, or maybe what's similar about them, and what appeals to you about each of them.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, right? I think that and this is just my opinion, and whether people agree or not, I'm just sharing with you my experience, strength, and hope. Like, leave what serves you. I mean, take what serves you and leave the rest. But I think that Ziva meditation, Emily Fletcher's technique, Vedic meditation, transcendental meditation, and primordial sound meditation are all very similar. Deepak, as you said, he was part of the Transcendental Meditation Organization. There was some sort of falling out, and then he went independent. He left and he went independent, and sort of like Tom, as far as my knowledge goes, left and just started kind of teaching the same technique when he left. And he was told he couldn't call it that anymore. At least that's what I'm under the impression of, which happened. Same kind of thing happened with Deepak. He was just kind of teaching the same technique that he'd been teaching while I was with the TM group. And then he was approached by them and told that he could no longer call it transcendental meditation. And so he called it primordial sound meditation, because the mantras that they use are the Sanskrit enunciations of sounds of nature, primordial sounds. And so the big difference, I'd say, between TM, Vedic meditation, Ziva meditation, primordial sound meditation is they use a different set of bija mantras. And so according to Deepak, they're like in the same way that the mantras were passed down, we'll say, from Guru Dev down to Maharishi. Like, there was some other person within the lineage that told him about these other bija mantras that they use in primordial sound meditation. And so the technique's similar, though, and the training's similar in the sense that it's 4 days. And on the first day, you get your mantra and you learn the mechanics for using it properly. There's a whole day that talks about like meditation's mechanics, and then a whole day that talks about like, we could say meditation being an antidote to stress. And then the fourth day is all about higher states of consciousness. So the training's structured very similarly to the one that, I experienced when I went to Light's training both times, and the one that I did when I got to take Emily Fletcher's training. But the mantras themselves are different. But according to Deepak, they're still bija mantras, and they're the Sanskrit enunciations of primordial sounds.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's all just different ways. Like, even outside of this tradition of effortless meditation, we're all types of meditation are trying to get to the same destination, which is, a feeling of oneness with everything around you, that accessing your inner bliss rather than having to chase it in the outside world. And it doesn't really matter what it's called, as long as it does something to you.
Totally. And I mean, to be honest with you, I have my mantra that Emily Fletcher gave me, which is
which one do you use? You've got so many.
Well, it's funny that you said that, because to be honest with you, until I'd learned with Emily, like, I kind of thought, after I started to learn more about Vedic meditation, that maybe like my mantra like wasn't as good as the one I was going to get from learning Vedic meditation. And so I had been meditating for years using my primordial sound meditation mantra when I met Emily, but I told myself I was going to stop using my primordial sound meditation mantra and start using the Ziva meditation mantra, which is, the same mantras that somebody would get when they learned Vedic meditation. And to split test it and see, like, does this give me some sort of benefit that my primordial sound meditation mantra isn't able to give me?
Mm.
And so I split tested it for a while, and truthfully, I didn't notice any benefit.
Mhm.
And that's just my experience.
Mhm.
And to be honest with you, like, I've been using now my Vedic meditation mantra just because I'm doing the Vedic meditation teacher training with Tim Brown. But I'll notice too that sometimes I'll just be like off my Vedic meditation mantra and on my primordial sound meditation mantra.
Yeah, what I think is so interesting, and I think we talked about this a little bit too, even for myself, what I notice and in the environment that we're in currently, especially in the United States with the divisiveness that's been going on and the pandemic kind of allowing everyone to kind of take stock about what's going on. For me, one of the themes that has really come up is this division versus inclusivity. And I know for myself, I've opened up my group meditations or my knowledge meetings to everyone, where before it was just for the graduates of the course. And I struggled with that choice. I wasn't sure if this was the right thing for me to do, if I was breaking with tradition or whatnot. But the impulse to be more inclusive and figure out, whatever the fallout would be from doing that was more important than keeping it exclusive. So, and that, for me, I learned TM in November of 2020 because I wanted to have my own personal experience of what is that technique. As I've been told, the one I've been trained in is very similar and it comes from this. So I needed to have my own understanding and experience of being trained in that tradition. And I think I mentioned to you, I want to learn, Bija meditation, Achem. I want to learn primordial sound. I want to do Ziva. So again, for myself, I can, one, have a primary experience of what that is, and then also kind of sit there and go, because once you learn that technique, you're invited into the community. So I'm a part of the TM community. I'm part of the VM community. If I take all these other ones, I'm invited as being a member. And then as a member of all of those, I would love, and I learned One Giant Mind technique. I'm a teacher of that as well. I would love to just create a table where everybody is welcome. Whether you graduated from my program or one that is similar, I don't want to continue in participating in what it is that keeps us apart. I want to participate in what brings us together, and I feel like that's kind of what you're doing. You know what
Well,
I mean? I'm going to follow your lead.
It's so interesting that we're having this conversation because I was actually, when you first asked me that question, Rory, that's actually where I was going to go with the conversation. And so, no coincidences that we're now here, but that is kind of my deep driving desire when it comes to all these techniques because, Deepak used to be a transcendental meditation teacher and now he teaches primordial sound meditation. I've learned meditation from Emily Fletcher and I've also done the Vedic meditation training. And I have this like deep driving desire to create inclusivity amongst those different groups rather than exclusivity because having done all of those, I can see how there's so many more unity points than there is things that are different between those two. And for me, it's like, think about how much more powerful we would be in creating, my podcast is called The Global Shift. And so how much, because the idea, like, I got the idea from Deepak Chopra. He says, like, when enough people take a quantum leap in consciousness, because we're all connected at a non-local level, will create a global shift. And so how much more powerful could we be together in creating, in helping people take that quantum leap in consciousness and creating a global shift if we worked as one rather than as separate entities?
Great question. Exactly.
And I understand that like people might not agree, and that's fine. But again, I think right now we need, especially in today's world with all that's going on, like unity, more unity, less separation.
Absolutely. So with that too, I'm curious if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit. What is your book about? Does it talk about this aspiration that you have to include people?
Yeah. So I actually was inspired by Light's book, Blissmore, because I thought to myself, I had never seen a book, right? I had learned meditation from a teacher, and obviously still think that that is the best way to learn. But for people who either weren't willing to go to a teacher and learn, or weren't willing to pay the cost it can, be sometimes, and still wanted to learn, I thought that that was the best book for learning meditation's correct mechanics. And I thought to myself, I'm like, I meet a lot of people in recovery, and one thing that's unique about my training is I will get anybody on a payment plan, and a payment plan that they can afford. And so people then don't have an excuse, or can use money as an excuse not to do the training. But I thought to myself, still not everybody is willing, even if I get them on a payment plan, to commit to that amount of money to learn how to meditate. So I thought to myself, I'm like, Light did a really good way at, I think, explaining some of meditation's correct mechanics to make the practice more easy and enjoyable in his book, Blissmore. And I'm like, could I write a book like this for people in recovery? And so I came up sort of like he did with an acronym, because there is a word that me and my buddies used to say when we'd ask each other if we did our meditation. We used to say, did you do your medi? Right? We used to joke around and say, did you do your medi? And I thought to myself, actually, me and my sponsor in recovery, who was actually with me the first time I ever did heroin at 15, he was the first person ever to stick a needle in my arm. And now he's been sober 14 or 13 years, and I'm coming up on 10 years sober. And so I worked with him to create this acronym, MEDI, that would help teach people just a few of meditation's correct mechanics. If they weren't able to take a training, that might make the practice more easy and enjoyable. But the book's written from the standpoint of how can we use meditation to overcome our negative habits and addictive behaviors.
Beautiful. I love that.
Which I know Rory does a lot of awesome work with too.
Yeah, so I'd like to hear a bit more about how maybe for people in recovery you present it differently, or what kind of how they're different as students, people in that world.
Well, a lot of the book talks about like how specifically meditation can help you overcome addiction. For me, what I say is like, so, I'm a member of AA, and, I went through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. But what I say is, even though this would never happen, but if the universe came to me and said, you can only do one more thing for your sobriety on a daily basis, you have to pick one, you can only choose one thing, it would be meditation, hands down. Meditation is the most important thing I do on a daily basis. Like nowadays, I tell myself, kind of jokingly, but I share this with new meditators, especially meditators in recovery. I tell myself, like, even if I did nothing right the rest of the day, as long as I do my 2 meditations, it's a good day. And so, I wanted to, there's a lot of stuff in there. Like, there's a whole chapter on what is addiction, from my perspective. And getting down to the root cause of that, but also explaining it from like the 3 different layers of life, like physical, how addiction affects us physically, mentally, and spiritually. And, then how we can use meditation to transcend that.
Beautiful.
Great.
Of course, the range of addictive behaviors goes beyond narcotics. And I think on one of your podcasts, I heard you mention that you were kind of getting into some other things as well. Do you come across people presenting with obscure addictions? I'm not particularly asking for examples, but it's obviously quite a wide remit. You obviously have an enormous experience in one particular area, but do you find that your expertise can also extend and assist people with other addictive behaviors?
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you asked that question, because the book's actually right in the beginning, of the chapter, What is Addiction? I share a definition of addiction I learned from a yoga and meditation teacher who's in recovery, who's doing a lot of great work. Rory, you might be familiar with him, but Tommy Rosen. Do you know Tommy Rosen?
No.
He's really awesome guy. He's done tons of work in the addiction recovery field. And he has his definition of addiction, and I've heard it from other people. I think Gabor Mate, you know him? He has a similar definition, which is any behavior we continue to do despite the fact it brings negative consequences. So based on that definition of addiction, I don't know anybody who doesn't have an addiction. And my experience is that these tools, meditation in particular, doesn't matter what the addiction is, work universally across the board. And as you were saying, Anthony, like, you know, for me, one of the biggest things about meditation is once I got sober and then started enlarging my spiritual life and meditating every day, I started to also become aware of all those other behaviors that were no longer serving me. And the first one was food, right? The way that I was eating, I realized was no longer serving me. And I kept eating a certain way. It was a behavior I continued to do despite the fact it was causing me negative consequences. It was an addiction for me. And so, you know, that's why it's so important too, you know, once you get sober, let's say from something like drugs and alcohol, to start to get down to what we'll call causes and conditions and the root cause, what's underneath that. And so then after, you know, I kept meditating and continuing to do all the other things that I was doing for my sober recovery, all the other inner work, I started to realize too that I had addiction to porn that was just as bad, if not worse, than the addiction I had to drugs and alcohol. You know, I realized that was another one of those behaviors I was continuing to do despite the fact it was bringing me serious negative consequences. But here's the cool thing is all the principles that I applied, including meditation, to staying sober from drugs and alcohol worked for every single one of my addictions across the board. And I coach people in recovery, and doesn't matter who they are, what the addiction is, these tools, no matter how deep or dark of a place you're in right now, are a solution that will provide a new life.
That's powerful.
I think it's very interesting you talk about food, because that's probably the one potential pitfall that we universally have in front of us. You know, things like drugs and pornography, we have to go an extra mile or take an extra step to get there. Whereas we're surrounded by food, particularly in this country, in the UK, we're surrounded with alcohol. We have a very strong cultural foundation based on alcohol. I know that Derrick has just referred to your fiancé as being a chef, and I know that on your website you talk about Ayurveda. Could you tell us a little bit more about your approach to food now that you've kind of recognized that was an area that was causing an issue?
Yeah. And I actually, not to like challenge you, but I would actually say that you'd be surprised now too in today's world. I would say pornography is almost as big as food now. It's incredible when you start to open up how many people are suffering from this issue. And because I've been so open and honest about that, I've had so many people reach out to me and ask for help. It's like mind-blowing how many people are affected by that addiction.
In this country, we certainly have an issue with school children, kids, very, very young children being exposed to it and becoming addicted to it and believing that this is the way that you have an intimate relationship. So there's a lot of violence, a lot of very unpleasant things going on. And of course, that distorts their whole view.
Yeah.
So I think it starts, unfortunately, I don't know what it's like in America, but it's probably the same. But here it is, the evidence is that it's starting at a very, very young age that kids are getting exposure to this.
Yeah, I mean, it was my first real serious addiction. I want to answer your question about food. I just wanted to expand on that just for a minute because it was my first real serious addiction. And, one of my family members works in a school system out here in New England. And, I mean, they have iPads, in the classroom, and kids are getting kicked off of their iPads in her classroom and their iPads taken from them because they're watching pornography. And I'm talking about like 4th, 5th grade. And so at a very young age, and I, like you said, we have this idea of like, that's what a relationship is supposed to look like. And my relationship, I'm getting married in 11 days and, I feel great about my relationship. But there was a time when I was watching pornography in my first few years of sobriety in my relationship where the relationship was suffering. And I realized it's because I had the porn was creating an unrealistic expectation about what sex should look like. And when it totally transformed how I viewed sex and how I viewed love and how I viewed my relationship once I was able to get enough separation between me and pornography. And so I just wanted to say that before I talked about the food. But yeah, when it comes to the food, like one thing I'd like to say, and I learned this after studying Ayurveda, was that everything we take into all five senses either has a negative or positive effect on our body and mind. And I was listening to this guy who was talking about health and wellness, and he said, if you had a Lamborghini, would you put 87 or would you put premium in it? And so the way that I look at it is this body is the vehicle, it's the Lamborghini through which you move through life. And so we have to put premium in it. And that's also as far as like going back to the recovery piece. And again, I think we're all in recovery. So if you're listening right now, like you're probably continuing to do a behavior despite the fact it brings negative consequences. So you're going to be in recovery from something. And so the reality is this is something that's so overlooked. We're trying to uplift the way that we feel when we get sober, and then we're putting liquid into our body that's making us feel worse. And so I just realized that when I combined eating healthier with practices like meditation, that's really when my life and my recovery went to the next level. And so that's why we created our retreats. My fiance grew up in an Italian household where like she learned how to cook at an early age and started to really enjoy being in the kitchen, and it became a passion of hers. And then once we went plant-based, she decided to learn how to become a plant-based chef. And so we like to include, because I feel like that's a missing piece, is like, again, I started meditating and I learned that the way I was eating was no longer serving me. And I know if I'm teaching these people how to meditate, I also want to teach people, and my fiance, her name's Sydney, such an amazing chef, because she teaches people that like you can eat all plant-based and it can taste really good. And I think people have this, preconceived notion that means that like all the food that they love and all those tastes that they're so accustomed to are going to be gone afterwards. Where I think on our retreats, we show people that like you can eat really healthy and it can taste really good. And when you combine things like eating healthy, which you're going to become aware of if you're meditating every day, that when you don't eat healthy, you don't feel good. When you combine things like eating healthy with practices like meditation, you can become unstoppable.
How long ago would you say that you went plant-based?
Yeah, so I know exactly when it was in. Funny you ask, because I was talking about it today. In 2014. I read, do you guys know the book The Light on Yoga by B.K.S.A. Iyengar?
No.
So in that book, he's talking about the 8 limbs of yoga, which you guys are probably familiar with. And he was talking about ahimsa, which is the principle of nonviolence. He was saying to not only practice the principle of nonviolence toward others, but toward all beings, which included animals. And I read that, and I had kind of wanted to stop eating meat because I didn't feel great always after I did. But I read that, and I actually ate meat for a few months after that. But every time I did, I just felt awful afterwards. And I just didn't feel good in my body. And so, I kept eating meat, but eventually it was kind of like drugs and alcohol. Like over time, continuing, to do something and not get the results that I was looking for, I finally decided to surrender and, try to go. First, I went vegetarian, which, I think is important. A lot of people, like, I think why they fail, like, trying to, start eating plant-based is, like, they go from, like, this, like, heavy animal product diet right into trying to eat plant-based. For me, it was a slow transition. First, I ate for, like, 6 months. I ate vegetarian because I actually did a yoga teacher training, and at the yoga teacher training, they fed us only vegetarian. So when I left, I'm like, this is my opportunity because I'm not feeling good when I'm eating meat. And so I'm just going to see how long I can go. And I remember I like looked at the calendar or whatever, and it had been 6 months. I'm like, oh my God, 6 months. I'm going to see how much longer I can keep this up. And then at some point, during that journey, dairy started to hurt my stomach.
Mm.
And then I'm like, well, if I'm already a vegetarian and now dairy's upsetting my stomach, I might as well try to just go all plant-based. And that was back in 2014.
And you definitely, I can say a few years back, I went paleo, and I just kind of tried it for a number of different reasons, and I got a lot of different benefits from it. And I noticed a shift like 3 months in. I was like, my sinuses were clear. I wasn't having like this foggy, headachy thing that I was having in the morning, and I dropped like 35 pounds, which I was not expecting. So I'm just curious, do you feel like you've made a major shift in the way that your diet has changed that's noticeable that in that way?
Oh, massive.
Yeah,
massive.
okay.
I mean, and it comes down to, like you're saying, like maybe somebody who's listening doesn't want to go plant-based. That doesn't resonate with them. That's fine. I think that the core principle, going back to the conversation here about Ayurveda, is everything we take into our five senses either has a negative or positive effect on our body and mind. So the whole idea here, and meditation is really good at helping us with that, is to become a more conscious choice maker, to learn how to pause, right? And ask ourselves, what are the consequences of this choice I'm making? How is this choice going to affect me and everybody else involved? And if we could start to become more conscious of those kind of questions and pausing and making more conscious choices before eating, I think it can really change the way that we feel in our body and our minds.
I think the pause is such an important point, but often when I go, I too am plant-based, and when I go to a supermarket, I see people purchasing fish and meat, and they're just looking at a package wrapped in plastic on a foam tray, and it's a steak, it's some bacon, it's sausages, whatever it is, and there's a strong dissociation with the actual animal that it came from. It doesn't look anything like the pig, the chicken, the cow. And I think it's not until you get up close to the actual animal. And to my, this is not to my credit, but when I was very hard up as a university student, a friend of mine managed to get a Christmas holiday job. And, we were desperate for work. We'd do anything. What I wasn't quite prepared for with this particular job was the plucking of turkeys, Christmas turkeys. But they were alive, and I had to slaughter them and then pluck them. And I just had to do it. I was desperate for the money.
Sure.
And that whole experience has lived with me. To actually kill a living thing with your hands, as big as a turkey, that's quite a. I know what the next question is. Did I eat Christmas turkey? The answer was no, I did not. Although I was given a bird that I probably had slaughtered myself. But it's this thing, and just the other day I was handling some fish for somebody, and there was this big, beautiful fish, and it was just the most magnificent thing, but it was dead. And I'm not squeamish, I can fill it and gut and all that sort of business. But it was once a beautiful living thing, and I think when we go shopping, when we go to the supermarket and so on, we've lost contact with what that really was once. What a magnificent creature it was once.
Yeah, I totally agree. My fiance says all the time, like, we're just so far removed from our food sources. And there's I don't know where it is, but I was told about this video that is floating around online. I think it's an older video, but it's like a supermarket, and the machine that creates the like sausage links. So in the supermarket, what they did was people would come up to the counter of the deli to get sausage, and they had all these little pigs like inside of like almost like a little fenced in area, and they would, when somebody would ask for sausage, they would take the pig who was like squealing right in front of them when they would grab it, and they would pretend to put it inside of the machine that would spit out sausage. But what they were really doing is they were just putting it inside like this like cage that was inside of the hole that they were sticking the pig into. But you would hear the pig like squealing inside of there, and then the sausage would come out, but they were just feeding the sausage link through a different hole. And people were like freaked out. Like nobody wanted the sausage after they asked for it. So it's like a great example of how, like, if we really understood our food source, like we might be less likely to make that choice.
Mhm. It's great. I mean, it's interesting too because I feel like as long as I've been meditating, I make much better choices now than I have in the past. But this conversation too is asking me to re-examine what are some of the current choices that I'm doing and how can I make a shift, especially hearing from a person like yourself reiterating, what addiction is, how, I probably have one that I don't recognize.
We all
And
do.
yeah, and well, when you said that, I was like, I checked mark like 100 things. But now I'm thinking too, it's like, yeah, even though I do pause, I could take an even grander pause now too and consider these things, in terms of my health and the positive or negative effects anything that I put in my body is going to have. So I appreciate all the knowledge that you've shared with us today. It's been amazing.
Yeah, well, the other thing too about the meditation for me is, like, as you guys know, like when they talk about cosmic consciousness and the Vedic meditation training, they talk about how that bliss from your meditation starts to rise up and meet you in your eyes open state.
Mm-hmm.
And so when our mind's more tranquil and less reactive outside of meditation, we can pause and make more conscious choices. But the other thing about meditation for me is, like, at a certain point in my journey too, I just started to recognize that the same love, truth, and beauty that was within me was within all things. And so it just made me have a very hard time taking the life of another living thing that was, essentially an extension of the same source that extended itself here into that which is me.
Beautiful. Gorgeous. George, this has been a really amazing conversation. We're coming up on the end of this hour, and I think it's to be continued. We would love to have you on again or join you on your podcast.
Yeah, please. We'll have you guys all on.
Okay, thanks for sticking around until the end. We're always looking for new ways to engage with you, our audience, and would love to know what topics and themes would be of interest to you. Also, who would you like to see as our guests? Perhaps you might be interested in coming on the show and talking with us. We would love to have you. Please share your thoughts and ideas with us via a direct message on our Instagram. And for those of you who are not camera shy, please feel free to share a video with the hashtag #TheVedicConversation. Also, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And if you found value in this episode, please share it with your audience and consider giving us a positive review to help others find us.